To order or anything, just
Here.
Brad Johnson.
here.
Craig Melton. Absent. Jim Hurst.
Present.
Josh Fedor.
Present.
Kendrick Davis.
Present.
Nick Plopper.
Present.
6 present. We want to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
We need
Let's
to.
do it. Yep.
All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And then, Dan, the show is yours.
Good morning, thanks for coming. We have a lot to cover today. We have, because of the timing of your meetings,
Your name and address?
as I said, we have a lot to cover.
That was Kendrick's joke.
Kendrick, there's always one guy.
Yeah, I'll be that guy, all right.
We have 2 legislative sessions to cover because of the timing of your meetings. We just had one end, and fortunately for me, I was able to deal with that for the last couple days. So if you go to page 2, I'm going to bounce you around a little bit, but in the 25 session, we had several important bills that will affect you. First is Senate Enrolled Act 425, which rewrote the procedure for text amendments. And it used to be that if the town council disagreed with you about a text amendment, it came back to you. That is no longer the case. So now they made a couple changes to that. They created a whole new section just for advisory plan commissions. So this rule only applies to advisory plan commissions, but now, once you send it to the town council takes final action. It does not come back to you ever. Also, if the town council rejects a text amendment, it can't be heard for a year. So in some jurisdiction, I'm not sure where, apparently there was a little back and forth, and someone didn't like that. If you go to page 3, vested rights, this is a really big issue. And I'll talk about it here and in the 26th legislation, and I'll talk about it later. But Section 1109 is the section, very important section in Indiana law, because it tells us when a property owner has vested rights. And that becomes important because outside of Indiana law, there is still this thing called the U.S. Constitution. And the 4th Amendment says that we, as regulators, cannot take someone's property without compensating them. And there is much debate about when zoning regulations are taking without just compensation. And so in the federal arena, there is no hard and fast rule. There is this idea that at some point, a developer who's doing these engineering studies and doing all this preliminary work prior to an approval, that at some point in time, they've done enough work and spent enough money so that they now have a vested right. And I've had cases in federal court where we've had to argue. I always represent the government, so I'm always arguing that our regulation has not in any way affected or been a taking without just compensation. Thank goodness in Indiana we have a rule. And 1109 says that a landowner does not have vested rights until they apply for a permit. Now, interestingly enough, the definition of permit only for sections, for purposes of Section 1109 is not what you and I think of as permits. It includes permits, but it also includes development plan review, plat applications. So it is a much broader definition than building permits or improvement location permits. So that allows us in Indiana at least to know where that line in the sand is, and that becomes very helpful. And I actually won a case on this. The lawyers from LA, France, and New York didn't know about 1109. And fortunately for me and my client, they didn't know that. But that helped us in a wind energy case.
Hey, Dan, what about federal permits? If they pull a federal or state permit first, does that give them vested rights on our zoning ordinance?
It does, yeah. Now, so the concept here, aside from the concept what is the function of this? The real function of 1109 started as a way to say, okay, if someone applies for a plat, let's just say, for example, and then we change our ordinances. We change the zoning ordinance or the subdivision control ordinance, what rules apply? So 1109 was originally intended to say, once someone files a complete application with Mike, they're locked in, and the ordinances and rules that are in effect on that day control that determination and control their rights from there forward for a certain period of time, without getting too complicated, for about 10 years. So they are not subject to getting their papers filed and have us say, well, but you see, after you filed 2 weeks ago, we've changed our ordinance, and now you have a new set of rules. That was the idea. But 1109 is becoming a huge battleground between governments and developers. And you will see, both last year and this year, the tweaking of 1109 is now fair game. And so, in this new law, there were several changes made, and so they added development agreements to what a permit is. So they added another, there are 7, now 8, different things that are permits, including development agreements. Now, we don't see a lot of development agreements. That usually takes place, that would take place between the council and the developer. Sometimes it involves tax abatement. Sometimes it involves some other financial agreement between the town, and then the town negotiates for things being done in a certain time period, contributions to roads, that sort of thing. So these development agreements are now permits. In addition to that, they added an exception, and they said that if 1109 has time periods that apply, and it does, 3 years and a 10-year, those time periods can be pushed back for extraordinary events. Now, among them, you will see I've listed them. Some of this we learned during COVID. So natural disasters and wars make sense, but you can see unavailability of material. So during COVID, there were times developers could not obtain the pipe, concrete, gravel, paving materials they needed. And so there's one. Unavailability of materials, equipment, services, or labor, utility or energy shortages, unexpected delays in procuring required permits and approval because maybe the government was shut down, resulting from pandemic epidemics and other health issues. Litigation and regulatory procedures got stuck in there, in my opinion, and other unforeseen events over which the permit holder has no control. So you can see they're now eroding away and saying, well, these hard and fast deadlines in 1109 apply unless they don't. And you're going to see some more about that. They also said in this bill that if a developer asked for an extension of time based upon one of these extraordinary events and the town wanted to deny it, that we had to provide written findings of fact about that denial, and that if the developer appealed that denial of the extension, that the time period which is in question is tolled. Otherwise, the clock stops during that entire appellate process. So those are big changes, and in this year, the legislature came back and did some more. In addition to those changes to 1109, they started talking about things which, in my opinion, have nothing to do with 1109, but they put shot clocks in, and you'll see on page 4, they amended that to provide, to say that we only have 30 days to determine whether an application for a permit is complete. Now remember, when we're in section 1109, when you see that word permit, you know that means all kinds of things, but one of the things that's defined as a permit in 1109 is a PUD. It's the one thing in that group that doesn't look like a permit to me. You know, a plat application, I could say, well, maybe kind of a permit, but how a PUD is that, I don't know. And I'll also say a development agreement is nothing like a permit. But not for me to say, that's just what the legislature said. House Enrolled Act 1460, also a 25 Act, said we have to vote on plats within 60 days of the public hearing. And again, we almost always do, but somewhere in Indiana, they had a problem getting a vote, so they didn't get that done. House Enrolled Act 1037 had to do with stormwater. And there were a couple bills in this session, 25 session, that dealt with this. So under the old law, local governments were allowed to develop their own rules about stormwater. Now, you guys don't see this much because we have an engineer review all these and they apply these standards. But Zionsville has its own stormwater ordinance and it contains all these rules. And the development community said, you know, everywhere I go, I have to have my engineer apply a different set of rules. So this 1037 said, well, you can have your own rules, but your rules cannot be more stringent than IDEMS for construction stormwater permits, general permits. That's a big change. If you go to page 5, you'll see House Enrolled Act 1460. And in 1460, much like the last bill, they said, oh yeah, some of you use different rainfall data. And we're going to tell you that you have to use FEMA and NOAA. You can't just have you can't just use like Indiana rainfall data from Purdue. You have to use this data because it is widely known and available. It also included another shot clock. You're going to see this trend. Somebody out there must be taking a lot of time because it put a shot clock for plat applications, 15 days to notify the applicant of deficiencies in an application, 30 days to announce the public hearing, and 60 days to conduct a public hearing. It also said, for the first time, if you fail to make a decision within 60 days of the public hearing, the application for the plat is deemed approved. So we never want to miss that deadline. Now we get to 2026, the bills that passed and were signed this past week by the governor, most of them on the 5th, 6th, and 4th, 5th, and 6th, so we were watching that closely. 176 involves shooting ranges, and there have been 2 or 3 big cases on shooting ranges. So indoor shooting ranges are largely not thought to be great in residential areas, and in some ordinances regulated pretty hard. Well, in a win for the indoor shooting range industry, the new law prohibits local units from treating an expansion of that as a loss of a non-conforming use. So you know, in your ordinance, we have a rule that says if you expand a use that really isn't allowed there, but you're grandfathered, but if you expand it by more than 35%, you lose your non-conforming use. They've taken that away as it relates to indoor shooting ranges. They also said that you must allow shooting ranges to be in commercial, industrial, and agricultural, and that any ordinance that says otherwise is void. And so here we go. This year was an active year, not much of it good for local governments. On page 6, House Enrolled Act 1001, my least favorite bill, at least for the last 8 or 9 years. This bill started as the hammer. It had provisions that would take away a lot of local control in zoning. Things like you can't have setbacks. You can't have height requirements. It was really full of a lot of things. It didn't end up being as bad as we thought, but it did include a lot of things focused primarily on affordable housing. So apparently there is the narrative by the development community is that there is in Indiana a huge housing shortage. I'm not sure there is one in Zionsville, but this is now the narrative, and that what stands in the way of solving that crisis is local zoning regulation. And so the legislature bought that narrative. So now I don't see that narrative. I don't see the facts that would support that in my own experience, but that's what won the day. So out of that conversation comes this. You'll see under A, each unit must gather data on what is going on with building permits and submit it to the Legislative Services Agency by January 1, 2027. And I think, you know, for Zionsville, it's going to show there are a lot of houses being built, and they cost a lot of money. That's what it's going to show. I'm not sure the data that we're going to provide them is going to really further the narrative, but all this data is going to be collected by the Legislative Services Agency. In essence, it was a compromise saying, well, before we change regulations for local government about what they can and can't do, let's at least study it. But all the burden of that study, instead of the Legislative Services Agency conducting their own study, which they have done in the past, and I've been part of a couple of those, they pushed it all off to the local governments to pay for someone to do together. It's a lot of data. And it,
Funded mandate,
I'm sorry?
an unfunded mandate.
An unfunded mandate, yes. And at one time, there were provisions in 1001, Jim and I spoke about this, that would allow local governments to opt out of all this. Those were taken out at the last minute, so there is no opt-out either. We are stuck with this. The second thing they're imposing is they're requiring all local governments to conduct public hearings before the end of this year on affordable housing, specifically to discuss how they could change their ordinances to allow affordable housing. And again, I'm a Nexus guy. I've listed all the things we have to discuss. And again, you might just keep a scorecard for me, Jim Hurst, and tell me whether or not any of these things have anything to do with affordable housing. But that's just my opinion. So you can see they're going to make, well, it'll be the town council's job. So either the town council will have this public hearing or you will. But we are to discuss making changes to our zoning ordinance, subdivision control ordinance, about whether we should provide for higher density development of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in areas designated for single family only. We are also supposed to examine whether constructions of other types of housing, such as accessory dwelling units, manufactured housing, and modular housing should be allowed where they are not.
Hey, Dan, can you just pause and just, for the record, make sure we note that Craig has joined the meeting? Thank you.
Got it.
We are supposed to consider whether we should allow adaptive reuse in commercial areas for residential. This is mainly like second floor, like in the village, above businesses. That's what that is mainly. On page 7, increasing allowable floor area, which is maximum lot coverage. Otherwise, the development industry thinks that the maximum lot coverage should increase, that we should make the lots smaller and the houses bigger and do that. Waiving or eliminating, we know we're in trouble when it starts like that. Waiving or eliminating regulations such as garage size and placement, steeper roof pitches, minimum lot sizes, greater setbacks, greater, I guess, meaning that's what the statute says, apparently greater than they want is the way I would editorialize that. Off-street parking, design standards that restrict or prohibit the use of materials that comply with building codes, like it has to be masonry, or it has to be this kind of masonry, and height limitations. So that's a lot right there, yes.
Did anything get brought up as far as minimum build square footage?
It's got a lot easier.
It's like a lot of, counties or cities have minimum, like you cannot build less than a 12,000 square foot home.
It was brought up. I wasn't privy to all the discussions, but yeah, in the previous versions of the bills, there were provisions to lower minimum lots and lower minimum size homes. You have some pretty high standards. This all would fly in the face of like your ordinance. Reviewing impact fees. You have a road impact fee and a parks impact fee. They want you to take a second look at that, specifically hearing the recommendations of the Advisory Impact Committee. Now, the Advisory Impact Committee, I've been a part of yours and others. 40% of that committee is required to be from the development and real estate industry. And you will see later, they're going to tweak that, but basically, they want to have more say in the impact fees they don't like. Now, in theory, I think they just get passed on to the person who buys the lot, so I'm not sure why they don't like impact fees so much, but they don't. Shortening and streamlining permitting, using property tax abatements to enable higher density and mixed-use development, not something that is very common, and donating vacant land, and other things, but that's the list that they made in the statute. So again, I think you can see the narrative. The narrative is that the reason people don't have houses they want and houses they can afford is because of regulation. I think it has almost no applicability in Zionsville, but I'm just here to tell you that's the way it is. This same bill also attacked fees. So in the past, if you changed the building permit fee, it didn't take effect for 90 days. They were successful in getting that pushed back to 180 days. And then they started, for the first time ever, regulating how much you could increase them. So if you look at page 8 at the top, and it now says we can't increase our fees more than every 5 years, and that when we do increase it, it cannot be more than the 5-year total change in consumer price index, the one CPI that they tagged it to. That's never happened before. There's always been a rule, that your fees cannot exceed the cost of processing and administering applications. That has always been the law. That apparently is not good enough. So now, despite what it may cost us or how many people we have in the planning department and the building department, it's going to be tied to an index, and it shows a distrust of local government. All these regulations, you'll see. It also shows that apparently our town council, town council members can't make their own decisions and then stand for election and let the people decide whether they want those people back. It's just these decisions are being taken away from local government. Okay. Then under D, you'll see they went back to 1109. And they said something, they said something that I think is already the law. But they basically said that if a permit application is filed and it complies with the law and all the local ordinances, it must be approved. I think that's already the law. The problem is this. Remember, when you get into section 1109, the word permit doesn't mean permit. And so I'm a little defensive here, but I want to watch where this goes, because I think that what they're trying, what if this did apply to a PUD, for example, which is supposed to be a discretionary approval?
Rezoning.
Yeah, see, it'd be tough. So the next one, impact fees, they came back to that one. And they changed the composition of the advisory committee. And they said, look, that 40% that it has to be from the building and real estate industry, we're not going to let you decide who they are anymore. One of them must be a single-family builder. One of them must be a multi-family builder. And one of them, it's not enough they're from the real estate industry. They have to be a realtor. And you still don't get to pick them. They must be selected based upon a recommendation from their statewide associations. And again, why would they do that? Because they think that towns pick people who will go along. Let's pick a realtor who will go along. Let's pick a builder who will go along. That has not been my experience. I've been to many of those advisory committee meetings, and all of the people I know from the building industry, they defend their turf. But this is really a big change. It also reflects kind of what this narrative. House Enrolled Act 1161 is also interesting, because for the first time in 25 years, they went back and talked about how Plan Commission members and BZA members can be removed. Now, in the past, the rule was that members of the Plan Commission and BZA could be removed by their appointing authority for no reason, any reason, a good reason, a bad reason. And again, I I don't know what happened, but they've decided that's not going to work. So now it says that that is only the case if the mayor appointed you and he is still in office, then he can remove you. But if you were appointed by one mayor and now there's a new mayor, that new mayor cannot remove you unless there's cause. Same thing with the town council appointments. The town council can remove you as long as they're all the same people. If one member of the town council is different because of an election or a vacancy or appointment, now you can only be removed for cause. Again, what is this all about? It is all about someone got removed and they thought it was in reaction to a decision, not wanting to go along, and the development, in my opinion, the development industry wanted that to be addressed. But that's a huge change that really nobody saw coming. Okay, a lot of bills this year. Enough of that. I'm going to go on to new cases. This year we had last year we had a lot of cases. This year we had one big case, and it's actually, well, it's kind of a Plan Commission and a BZA case and a staff case. But this case reaffirmed the longstanding opinion that you can't just run to court if you're mad at us. If you're mad at the staff or you're mad at the Plan Commission or BZA, you have to go through the process that is provided for either by statute or our procedures. So in this case, Chosen Consulting got into a fight with the town of Highland. Chosen wanted to repurpose a nursing home for a drug addiction facility, residential facility. This is big business. This is really big business. Drug rehabilitation, drug addiction, substance abuse centers. There were 5 cases last year just on this issue. Well, we got one more. So in this case, they went in and said, look, this is a nursing home. We think that's the same thing as a drug addiction center. We want you to tell us that we can repurpose it. And staff said, no, nope, that's not the same as a nursing home. And under our definitions, you would need a use variance. They didn't like that. So they called the planning director and said, I need you to write me a letter that tells me I can do that. And the staff said, no, we've already told you can't do that. Now, what is that? When Mike says that, that is a determination. And if they don't like Mike's determination, they don't have to like it, but they have the right under state law to go to the BZA for an administrative appeal. And Josh and Jim are on the BZA, and if somebody doesn't like a determination, they can go to the BZA. Well, Chosen didn't want to do that, but they had that right. What else could they have done? They could have applied for a use variance. They weren't denied anything. They weren't denied a use variance. They never applied for a use variance. Instead, they just sued the town of Highland in federal court. And it's funny how these cases go, but Seventh Circuit is in Chicago. The only court above the Seventh Circuit is the Supreme Court of the United States. So this goes all the way up, and they say, oh, heck with that local procedure, we're just suing them. And the district court and the court of appeals said, no, you really can't do that. We've said this for 100 years. You have to make yourself available to the process that's available. So you should have either filed an administrative appeal saying Mike Dale doesn't know what he's talking about, or you should have applied for a use variance, and then only if you had a denial should you have appealed. And it might have been granted, by the way. It might have been granted. And so that's a really important case for us, because we don't want any time, again, neither the Plan Commission or BZA made a decision here. They just didn't like what staff said. They ran straight to federal court, and that's expensive for the town. We don't want people having that right. Okay, if you go to page 10. So I put in the front of your materials every year things that I think deserve special attention. I call it points of emphasis. And so I'm going to address a couple issues, either that I just want to remind you of, or things I know you're going to encounter soon. And the first one is making findings of fact. And every year I talk about this, and I just want to reiterate some things I've said before, because it's just so important. And the reason it's important, making findings, is because if we have an appeal, the courts will say, wow, we'll give them a transcript of your entire meeting. We'll give them every piece of paper in the file, and they have everything in front of them. And we hope that from that, they can see what your reasoning is. Judges have, in time again, said, Well, I reviewed all that, Mr. Taylor, and I have no idea what your people were thinking. They heard everything, and then they just said, I move and deny. No. Then it gets appealed. Then I have to go and argue what you were thinking, even though you didn't say it. Hard thing for me to do. Although I've got my ideas about that. So how do you let a reviewing court know when you guys are here and you think your audience is the audience? But for me, it's the Court of Appeals judge who I'm going to have to stand in front of. And I want to make sure that we're establishing a record of what we were thinking. The best way to do that, there are two ways. One is to ask questions that relate to the factors that you're supposed to be looking at. So if we have a rezone, we have 5 factors. If we're asking questions about that, the best question, it seems simple, but the best question for a petitioner who wants to rezone property is, our first factor is we need to look at the comprehensive plan. Why do you think what you're proposing is consistent with our comprehensive plan? And then you let them talk. Now, your staff has probably already addressed this in their report, and you usually have their proposed findings of fact, the petitioner's proposed finding and narrative, where they should be addressing all 5 factors. You let that person talk. Then the remonstrators are going to get up and they're going to tell you, among other things, this is completely against the comp plan. And they're going to give you more information without you asking. They'll just tell you. So then when you have your discussion, this is the second way we tell the court what we're thinking is you discuss it. You ask questions related to the factors, then you discuss the factors. And when you have a rezone, and I'm going to put this on Brad a little bit, but the president should make sure we're hitting all 5 factors. Okay, if it's a plat, we've got factors for every case that is in front of you. We should try to hit things. If you guys don't do that, every once in a while I'll speak up and say, do you guys want to talk about the comp plan? We want to do that. I might do that because it's very important. So making these findings, it's really important. It's how we defend our decisions. And I just would ask you to kind of think about the fact that this is an audience, but there also is this other audience we have to, show what we were thinking. It's not hard to do, but just asking the right questions is really good. Brad, did you have something?
Should we limit public comments to those 5 factors as well?
I wish we could. We're not allowed to do that. It would make things a lot better, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
No, we're not allowed to do that. There are a couple cases that say members of the public have a statutory right to remonstrate, and they can say whatever they want.
Actually, I'm fine with that. I like that they can say anything because it's hard to coach the general public in saying the 5 factors. But should we then guide the developer's presentation? So we all loved a recent development that came in here, but the presentation was all about a single amenity, which isn't specifically to a comprehensive plan, but that was 90% of the presentation. Should we ask them to be more specific to the 5 factors?
Yes, and again, that's exactly how you do it. You coach them by asking them questions. And I have one plan commission that's only been around about 8 years, which in the world of plan commissions is pretty new. And in training, before they ever had a meeting, I told them, you have to ask questions about all 5 factors in a rezone. And they were really literal about it. They were like, okay, we need to ask you some questions. Number one, tell me about how this would line up with your comp plan. Number two, let's talk about current uses and conditions in the area. Number three, do you think this is the most desirable use? I mean, they literally read from, I didn't make them a script, but they took their training materials and they just read those questions. They weren't really good at following up. Like, you guys are really good about developing things and asking more than one question about a factor. But if I had my ruthers, I'd say, yeah, if we could be as detailed as that and ask something about every factor, even if you think, that that particular factor doesn't carry the day. So, for example, in a rezone, it's the totality of all 5 factors. So we can't get hung up on any one of them. We have to look at all of them. Even if you think that there's really no impact on fair market values, for example, touch on it, even if you don't think it's a major issue, because we really need to. And who knows, we might be surprised what we hear. And then after you ask questions, then when it comes times for you to discuss it, and Brad says, well, what do you guys think? That's when we need to actually think out loud a little bit for the court. The courts have said they will look at the staff reports. So when you all say, and Josh does a good job of it, he'll say, for this reason, this reason, this reason, and everything in the staff report. I like that, because the staff report is something to look at, everything that is said. I just want to try to make sure, if I say, Judge, there are 17 things in the record that support this decision, and I can point to something each of you said, we're going to win. We're going to win. And actually, when it gets to the town council, this is all the same with the town council. When you guys do a rezone, everything I'm saying today applies to you guys as well. You guys should also talk about all 5 factors. The courts say you're not allowed to just say, yeah, those plan commission guys, they're geniuses. You're not allowed to say that. You're supposed to go through the same exercise. So anyway, asking questions. There's one more reason why we should ask questions about factors, and I always call this the curiosity rule, okay? And that is, if we ask a lot of questions that have nothing to do with the factors, if there's an appeal, I can tell you what that lawyer is going to do. That lawyer is going to say, they were more concerned about this thing over here that has nothing to do with their decision. And I can tell you that, Your Honor, because you have the transcript in front of you, and I want you to look at how long they talked about it. And I had one case I always talk about in training, and literally it was a rezone, and literally what the first question out of the Plan Commission president's mouth was, you're a restaurant, what kind of food are you going to serve? And they said, and whatever they said, I don't really recall what they said, but whatever it was, she said, well, we already have a lot of those restaurants. See, we're not off to a very good start. One, it's not a factor. And two, now that attorney's going to say they just didn't want another chicken place, or they didn't want another car wash, or car dealer. I've had all these things. And on a car dealership case, what kind of cars are you going to sell? I had an attorney say to me once, was the answer right or wrong? I'm like, oh, there's no right answer. Well, why did they ask then? So questions that get outside the 5 factors, those get used against us, right? Those can get used against us. Like, and I'll tell you, I've been married 38 years. I know when to keep my mouth shut. And it extends my marriage. It really does. So sometimes we just have to not let curiosity kill the cat. We have to really have some discipline and say, I'd hate to create a basis for appeal because I went off on what kind of food they were going to serve at the restaurant. And I know it seems harmless, but you know, if you have denial, they'll grasp on anything. Trust me. Okay. The other thing to remember is number 4 there is a good motion. When you go through factors, says, I don't believe it's consistent with the comp plan because. That's the magic word, because. Whatever follows because is your reason. Okay, and that I like to see because. I don't believe it, you know, if it's a plat, I move we deny, it doesn't meet our ordinance because. It doesn't have the appropriate utility easements that are required by ordinance. Say it. Say what the because is. It's what wins the day.
We, for staff, maybe they write out the motions in a lot of cases, or options for that. Maybe add the word because and then a blank to guide us into maybe adding that language. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people do, and I like that. And some of them even put the because, if they've identified a because in their staff report, they just put it there. You can always strike it. But I think it's even more helpful to say because. Now, it's harder in a rezone, but a lot of in a DPR or a plat, if they see a problem and they tell you it's not compliant, or a certain condition needs to be made, I think they should just include it right in there. It's just a proposed findings of fact. It's not, you guys are intelligent enough, you don't have to feel like you're locked in by something staff gives you. Okay, approving comprehensive plans. Guess what? You're in the middle of approving a comprehensive plan. So I wanted to have some reminders in there. So if you look at page 11, your comprehensive plan currently is at the town council. I did attend and hear a lot of that discussion, which seemed productive. It's going to be coming back to you. The town council is going to provide you a written statement of their reasons, and then when you get that, remember, you have some options. So you have 60 days to do something after it comes back to you on a certification. If you don't take any action, then the amendments that are proposed by the town council, they become effective. Okay? And I've had some plan commissions say, we're completely happy with that, let's just do nothing. It's not what I prefer. I think if you agree, you ought to just vote, because it happens faster. If you disagree with any one of the proposed amendments, you can send it back to the town council, and then the town council has to vote again. You have to have an affirming vote for your previous condition. You control the day, the town council controls the day, but they have to vote again, saying, no, we really like the way we did it. Or you can accept what the plan commission proposes. So that, and then it stops there. So
Dan.
it doesn't go back and forth forever.
On the front end, can we do a joint meeting with the planning commission and the town council ahead of this back and forth, just to kind of reaffirm some of the amendments that have already been brought up at the public level?
Yep. I think you can. I've seen that before, yes.
Okay, so I will ask that's likely a request. It's going to come in the next 3 or 4 weeks. My understanding, there's no timing pressure, but it is going to be hard to get everybody together. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I thought the council was very thorough in their work, so. Okay, if you go to page 12, special considerations about rezone. I've talked about some of this already. I just want to talk about number 3 for a moment. And that is, when you see a proposal for a rezone, what I would like you to do is pull out that use table and look at that district. If they want to go ag to residential, one of the residential districts, or to commercial, look at that district that they want to go to, and you will see that there are lots and lots of uses in those districts which are permitted. And you may say, you know what, I kind of like commercial in that area. This is especially an issue in rural areas and even in the village, where you're looking at rezones, and you want to be careful because every area is different. Every site is different. So you might say, you know, I don't mind that there, but I sure wouldn't want all these things that are allowed in a commercial district. Start making a list of uses you don't want there. Even if they feel like you're going to support the rezone, this is one of the real keys to great planning, is to say, we'll allow what you want, and maybe even a couple other uses, but there's a whole list of things we would never want there. And that's really important, because once you rezone it, you may never see that applicant again. They may sell that land, and you may be dealing with somebody, and the first thing they want to do is bring in a use that you would have never approved at a rezone. But when you approve their rezone to commercial, for example, you did approve that use. And so remember, their proposed use is only one of many that can be done. And so when I see plan commissions really functioning well, they start eliminating, or what we call redlining, uses. Let's just start striking the ones. That requires you to live a little bit in your use table. And I look at your use table a lot, and I always see something I didn't see before. It's pretty, there's a lot there. But I would invite you to pull out that use table in every rezone case and make sure if you're going to say okay, that you're really saying okay only to what you think is appropriate for that particular site.
Questions, or one comment and one question. Question is, do you have a preference on how that gets tracked so that future staff, future administration doesn't miss that it's been constricted to just a certain number of uses?
Yeah, I prefer a condition. So you would say, I move we give a favorable recommendation to this with the following conditions. One of those conditions being the following permitted uses in a commercial district are not allowed, and then a list.
But as far as how it gets legally recorded, like, is it a deed restriction, or is it just a note in our computer system? Like, how do we?
On the administrative side, we do that. But the ordinance rezone, it gets recorded. So that provides notice to the world when the town council does their work, yeah.
So comment, and just this supports exactly what you said, is I've actually seen cases where a developer comes in with the least objectionable use and asks for rezoning, and then the very next day after they get it, they apply for something that's much more intense. So they are really after the more intense uses there, but they ask for the least intense to get the rezoning, and it is being done.
Yeah, especially with the passage of time, you know, there's one plan commission I've been serving for almost 25 years, and I've heard recently, well, you know, in 2004, when we approved that for C1, we never contemplated that would ever be a body shop. You know, it was supposed to be an ice cream business. And unfortunately, I've been there long enough to go, yeah, I remember that. Yep, I remember. So, yeah, that's very important. But I think, yeah, if you get past the basics and you're looking at plan commissions that are going to operate at a higher level, this is something they do all the time and they do regularly and they know. And so I just wonder, you guys have done that in the past. I think that's great. I just think you have to really think about that is if I really like this use, then how can I limit it to just that use or uses that I think are similar? But I mean, especially like commercial is so broad and so many different permitted uses. You want to attack that a little bit. Okay. If I could have you go to page 14. I'm not going to cover everything today, but I hope you read it. But I'm going to hit on the next phase of the training. I'm just going to hit on some really important things that I can't do my job without telling you. So conflicts of interest. You're in your role on the Plan Commission, you handle two different types of cases. Legislative cases, which are like comp plan, rezones, PUDs, text amendment. Those are legislative. You are making recommendations to the town council. The second type of cases you handle are zoning decisions. And zoning decisions are those cases in which you have the last word. Plats, DPRs primarily, you have the last word. The standard for conflict of interest is different for these two. And so I just want to point, it's a nuance people miss. But for legislative acts, since you're merely recommending, it's kind of a little bit of a lower standard. And so you have to recuse yourself and not participate in a meeting if you have a direct or indirect interest, pecuniary interest. So direct interest, I think most of us get. If you will make money or might make money because of an approval, can't participate. What if your wife or husband might make money, if not you, but they might? That's a conflict of interest as well. Son or daughter, basically immediate family, that's enough. And I think that makes sense. But believe it or not, there are cases out there where people argued saying, look, I've been accused of a conflict of interest and I don't think I had a conflict of interest. And one came from a Boone County case right out in Perry Township where a member of the Plan Commission's wife owned a 1/5 interest in the land next door. And I would have told him that's not a conflict of interest. The Court of Appeals agreed with that, said, no. That's not what we're talking about. Does your wife have an ownership interest in the land being rezoned? No. Okay, well then you don't have a conflict of interest. It was close. It was right next door. Is that enough? No. Now, might his wife's interest be affected in some economic way because of the decision? Arguable. But the court said that's not enough. It has to be an interest in that land specifically. And so we have a case right down the road here that really helped us understand that. Let's talk about process for a minute. If you do have a conflict of interest because you do have a financial stake, then you're supposed to tell the secretary that you have this. And then when we get to that case of the meeting, you have to leave the room. You might ask, why do I have to leave the room? And it's so that you're not out here making hand signals to everyone saying, granted or not. I actually have seen that done. And I had to say, out of the room. Yeah, exactly. No. So you have to leave the room and then we'll come get you later. We want to eliminate any appearance that you influence the decision makers who would be the people you left behind. If you go to the next page, now we're going to talk about the zoning decisions. If you're in a zoning decision, then it's a little more complicated. We still have the pecuniary interest, but then we have bias and prejudice. Bias and prejudice, things that are in the eye of the beholder, are a little more difficult. So what is that rule about? That rule is about, can you be impartial? So if your best friend has a case in front of the Plan Commission, does that mean you're automatically unable to be impartial? No. If you've ever worked with friends, or I coach with a couple of my friends, I can be impartial. I can take my job seriously, but not everybody can. So there's no bright line rule here. The question is simply whether you can be impartial. Let's say the petitioner is just someone you don't like very much. Same rule. Okay, you don't like him. Josh, you don't like him, but can you be impartial? And if the answer to that is no, I'm going to vote no, and I don't care what evidence there is, I'm going to say, get out of the hallway, right? So impartiality is the key here. Now, there was a case, you see at the bottom of the page. Nope, you're not going to see it. It's elsewhere. But there is a case that came out of Madison County where they approved a very large industrial solar project, and all these appeals came out of it. One of them was that the chair of the Plan Commission should have recused herself because one of the farm owners who was going to lease her ground was her friend. And the evidence showed that was true, that they were friends. And the court said that's not enough. Friendship is not enough. And we're talking about the wrong issue. What should we be talking about? Whether she could be impartial. And the Plan Commission president's testimony was, that particular petition was out near where she lived, and she knew 50 or 60 people who were affected one way or the other. She said, I have a lot of friends, and everybody was affected, and everybody was on different sides, and half of them love me now, and half of them hate me. Court said, friendship's not enough if you can be impartial. And you'll see there on page 15 that Perry Worth Concerned Citizens case I mentioned earlier. Okay, if you'll now flip with me over to page 17. I just would note here, this is where I kind of separate discretion, no discretion. Now, no discretion doesn't mean the petitioner wins. It just means that if they can satisfy the factors, then you must approve. And Brad made a good point last year that some of your factors do involve some subjectivity, like is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Well, that's a big document. That's not like we look at one page of the comprehensive plan and it gives us the answer. So that's not what I mean. I just mean if you find that they meet all the factors, then you must approve. That's a ministerial. For things like rezones and PUDs, the courts say that is a legislative function, even though it seems like a zoning decision. When it gets to the town council can handle it just like they do every other decision they make. And as long as they can tell us why they thought those 5 factors leaned yes or no, they're golden. And town councils are given a lot of discretion. The most discretion on any zoning is on rezone. So you see that at the bottom of page 17. If you'll now go over to page 19, I always say this, I'm going to say it again, a PUD is a rezone. And it's a scary rezone to me because if you look at page 21, because we allow them to write their own ordinance, and I always get really nervous about that. So we need to look at those carefully. Your staff will do so. I know you will do so. We need to not treat it like there's some magical form PUD we all love, PUD ordinance we love. There isn't. They write their own ordinance because they don't like yours. Well, when somebody does that, I want to make sure that I look at every page, and it's a lot of work, but it's important. If you will go to page 25, I want to talk a minute about waivers. And we had this happen this year, but we had a petitioner who didn't want to comply with something in our zoning ordinance, and they said, well, I'm just going to ask for a waiver. Well, you can't get a waiver for something in the zoning ordinance. That's called a variance. You have to go to the BZA for that. You can't get that from the Plan Commission. So how do we know what waivers you can grant? We know that because our own ordinances tell us that. Now, traditionally, waivers, what can be waived is in the subdivision control ordinance. But your town council could say in the zoning ordinance, a petitioner can get a waiver from this requirement if they can show A, B, and C. They could, your ordinance controls these. So your staff, when somebody wants a waiver or relief from your ordinance, they will figure that out before it gets to you about, is it a waiver or is it a variance? If a variance, you won't see it. Only Jim and Josh will see it at the BZA. But when someone wants to be relieved, it isn't always a waiver. And plan commissions all over the state of Indiana were getting that wrong for years and years until there was a case in Floyd County where they said, the Court of Appeals said, stop doing that. Okay, that's called a variance. Different people make that decision. Findings are required. Make that vote before you get to the case at hand. And remember, waiver requests are discretionary. So, like, let's say this is in a DPR, which is a non-discretionary case. They ask for a waiver. On the waiver itself, that you have discretion. You have discretion there. Okay, and really the question for a waiver is, will it give us something better? So sometimes they'll say, for example, I don't want to put perimeter landscaping on a drive-through because, the exhaust fumes will kill those plants anyway. And we say, that's awesome. Where are you going to put those shrubs and bushes, and how are you going to beef up your landscaping to make that better for us? So waivers, I view waivers as opportunities to have a better outcome. And so like landscape waivers are one example where they can't quite do what we need, so they move it. If you'll go to page 26. The open door law, I'm required to tell you that the Indiana law requires that members of the public have the right to attend and record your meetings. Now, does that mean they can videotape you? Yes. Does that mean they can audio tape you? Yes, they may. Can they do that for the purposes of mocking you? Absolutely. They can. Yes, they can. So that's a simple rule, but the hard part is, what the heck is a meeting? And a meeting is whenever a majority of you, 4, are gathered together, like the song, we are gathered together, for the purpose of doing business of the Plan Commission. And the problem there is that the definition of what a meeting is not what we would think. Because if 4 of you together and you just listen and don't say a word and you're listening to information, say about a development, that's a meeting. Receiving information alone is a meeting. Obviously, if you debate and deliberate, that's a meeting, that makes sense, but that receiving information part has gotten some people in trouble. So a couple things to be careful of. When our meetings are over, although I would like to go home, one of the concerns I have is that not more than 4 of you are talking in a group after the meeting. Now, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about things that don't have anything to do with the Plan Commission, but the public doesn't know that. And if they just lost and they're mad, they especially don't know that. So try to watch that if you can. I was a part of one case where someone said that was a violation. They were talking about the case. We presented evidence that, we were talking about IU's football run in the national championship or something like that, but we had to put affidavits in about what they were talking about. But if you see me hanging around a group of 4 of you, nudging Jim Hurst to walk away, you now know why I do that.
I found you do that even if I'm just talking to one person.
Even if he's talking to himself, right, yeah, right. But just avoid that. It's the appearance of it that might cause problems, yes.
If there's a public meeting that's going to talk about some improvement or some kind of development proposal, whatever, it's just like I'm trying to think of an example, but.
The comp plan public meetings we had last year, be a perfect example.
So if 4 of us are attending that, just because we're interested in the subject, that's technically a meeting? Because
Well,
we're
there's-
gathering information. Like if a new landfill wanted to come into, and they were gonna have this public meeting, we wanted to come and hear the proposal.
There's a case out of Boone County right on that.
Okay,
And it had to do with the Boone County Commissioners who attended the Boone County Council meeting at which time the council was very concerned about the attorney's fees. And this was not my firm, not when my firm represented Boone County, so I can tell you, but I'm aware of this case. And all three county commissioners were there, and the court, after it was all reviewed, the Lebanon Reporter filed a open door violation case, said the attendance of a majority of the Board of Commissioners was not a violation. And when the first one spoke, that was not a violation. But as soon as the second one spoke at the meeting, we had a violation. So all of you could attend a meeting about a potential development somewhere, and it's not a violation until the fourth one of you stands up and speaks. So that is a great question, because that will happen in the world of planning and zoning. That happens. And so there's a 3-person speaking limit if that occurs. And at BZA training, Jim Hurst told me he was going to go to whatever meetings he wanted to anyway. But the speaking number is what got to be important.
Majority of the members can't speak.
A majority of the members. 3 of you could speak your mind all you want, but the minute the fourth one gets up. So there is one way to deal with that. If it is a meeting that all of you want to attend and you want to speak, all we have to do is try to get the meeting here and notice it as a meeting. And there are, one of my clients, they notice every county council meeting and every Board of Commissioners meeting as a meeting of both bodies. And they have a note. A majority of the county council may also be in attendance, or a majority of the Board of Commissioners may also be in attendance.
Dan, I appreciate you raising that, because after our discussion at BZA, I thought every agenda for Plan Commission, and maybe BZA, but certainly Plan Commission, says a majority of town council, a quorum of town council may be present. Can we just add similar language to town council meetings?
Absolutely could.
Is it a requirement for the board or commission to announce if there's public elected officials at these meetings?
No.
It's been done in the past and seems kind of politically motivated, but also it could cover some of this as well, but it's not a requirement.
Not a requirement. Again, it's just, on the agenda, you have to post, outside. It just says right at the top, it has both entities, and it says, well, the ones that I've used say, whoever's not really meeting says a majority of this body may also be present and speak at this meeting. So it is noticed. The newspapers have been given that agenda. They know it. Everybody in the world knows it. So, yeah, it's a good question.
And sorry to stay on this. My concern isn't really that I'm compelled to go to town council meetings to speak on issues on Plan Commission or BZA matters, but I might be attending for other purpose, and I don't know what the rest of these folks are doing, and I don't know what they're going to talk about, but all of a sudden I find myself in violation because I was there about the ice cream festival, right?
You're right, right. And see, the open door law doesn't give us an exemption if we're not there about a planning matter. So yeah, it doesn't matter what you're there to talk about. It's just look, there are 4 of us here, now we've got a problem. So
I would be supportive of including BZA and Plan Commission members as maybe being in quorum. I don't know what the process or decision-making for that is, but.
Particularly for the BZA, because there's only 5 of us on that board, 2 of us sit in on this. If one came to remonstrate, we are technically in violation there, are we not?
yeah.
With those changes in the state law that things don't bounce back and forth a bit, we may want to attend the town council meetings just to share why we voted the way we did.
Absolutely. Yeah, this comprehensive plan is a perfect time where you may have, you might want to attend the town council meetings, and they might want to attend your meeting.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you have, they may not be able to agree which 2 people are going to represent them. And so it may be that, yeah, they all need to be here. In fact, it might be a better meeting, if we have them here.
Dan, can I ask you a question? In
Yeah.
our materials, are there any cases in the back that where the open door laws are the subject of the case?
There are cases in the back about the open door law, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
look forward to checking them out. We hear a lot about the open door law, and we don't want to violate the open door law, but I don't know a lot about what happens if we do, what the
Yeah.
remedies available, who has standing to pursue them. You know,
I'll address it real quickly, and then there are some cases we'll talk about. But essentially, if you violate the open door law, whatever action was taken, whatever your decision was at that meeting, doesn't count. You have to come back to it. And you also have to pay the attorney's fees of the person who raised the objection. That's the impact of it. It's also embarrassing. And I've had clients do it, despite my training of them. But that's the way it works. But I've included on the very last part some cases, and I'll talk about two of them for you. Good question. So you see at the bottom, page 26, what taking action is, and you can see how broad it is. It's not just voting and deliberating. Receiving information just seems to be pretty broad. Email, just remember, under the access to, well, first of all, as it relates to the open door law, the public access counselor said that emailing is not a meeting unless it becomes a chat. Okay? So in and of itself, email is considered to be paper mail, letters, not a meeting.
At what point in time is it considered a chat?
They look at how quickly the responses are. All that is time dated on a computer, and if it, in the eyes of the public access counselor, if it looks like it was a concurrent conversation, then that's different. I just would say this, does it look like a meeting online? We know what that is, right? We've had those. Or does it look like an ongoing conversation over several days where somebody responded, the next day somebody responds, the next day somebody responds? So that's the rule. Now, email, though, under the Access to Public Records Act, your email, regardless of device, if it's about the business of the Plan Commission, it's public. Text messages, same rule. So if you text each other on your personal phone and somebody files a public records request and they want to see all the conversations you've had about whatever, they get them. So be careful in your communications. And if I have to call you and say, I'm going to need you to bring your personal cell phone to the town hall and have the IT people download some information, then that's the way that happens. And then someone, usually me, usually the attorney, has to look at all those and has to figure out which ones are public and which ones are private. Seems simple enough, except I'll be looking at all your text messages and your emails. So be careful. So if you're communicating about something, if Josh and Nick are down there, and then Nick wants to add something about, that's not business, that's going to be in the same email. Now, I can redact it, but I will have read it. And let me tell you, I've learned some things about my clients over the years, so please be careful.
Would it be good practice for the commissioners to have a separate email account for correspondence related to
Separate,
planking?
I don't think it's necessary for that, but
Okay.
have a separate folder. If you're using your own devices, create a folder for Plan Commission so that if we have to do a search, we don't have to search all of your information, we can search that folder. Also, the Access to Public Records Act says that your texts and emails, if they're about Plan Commission business, have to be retained for 3 years. Even if you trade your phone in, have to be retained for 3 years. So what I think is, you can email each other and text each other about what time is the meeting and all that. For other things, I would use the phone. I'd pick up the phone. I know texting and emailing is so easy, but you're creating a record. And that's really not what I think you should be doing. I think you should just pick up the phone and do it that way. I always say to people, if you wouldn't take that email or that text and tape it on the front door of the town hall, don't do it. And trust me, you wouldn't even believe the things I've seen. So, and in one case, I told my clients, do not talk about this. This is going to end up in federal court. I was right. And so the search produced 10,000 emails. 10,000, after I told them not to. So you can do what you wish. Please listen to my advice, though. Okay, the bottom of 27, RLUPA, the Religious Land Use Institutionalized Persons Act, says we cannot discriminate against someone who files an application on the basis of their religion. We have to treat them like everyone else. And I always say, if a church files an application, treat it like the school filed it, or a hospital, or some other institutional use. We can't discriminate against them. It's federal law. I don't know why they put religion and prisons in the same federal act. I don't know that, but our LUPA is a big deal, and you need to remember that. And some of the best ways, my mother taught me a long time ago that everyone would know what I was thinking by when I opened my mouth. So I will say that bias is often shown through what you say. So don't ask questions about anything about their religious practices. Don't ask anything. And there is a famous case out of Colorado where they said, believe it or not, not what your building is going to look like, but now when you baptize, are you submerging them under the water, or do you not do that? Okay, well, that doesn't matter. What did that show? Like, the petitioner should have said, I don't know, what's the right answer? I don't know, right? But we can't get into all that. Can't ask them the name of their church or their denomination or what they believe. It's just not relevant for us. Cannot be. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a case later about that. So then if you'll go with me to page 29, I just want to show you that I wrote out a bunch of questions. Like if I were writing questions on a rezone, here are a bunch of questions I would ask. So they relate to the 5 factors. Okay. Now I'm going to have you go back to page 33 and just show you, I've talked a little about this, but there's some material in here on Section 1109 vested rights. It's a lot of plan commissions never talk about it, but again, it's a big deal, so I want you to know. Homeowners covenants on page 34, it's not our job to enforce those. Despite what your neighbors tell you, it's really not our job, and we're not allowed to, and the courts have said so. And then if you look at page 35, now I'm going to talk about some cases. So I love this Nova Groder case. This is a case out of Indianapolis. It's an old one, but a good one. In that case, there were commitments made when there was a rezone that was going to allow a CVS on a corner, a Walgreens on a corner, and 25 years later, they go out of business and move because, that neighborhood has changed. And now here comes Dollar General. And apparently nobody likes Dollar General. I don't know, but in the world of planning and zoning, there are a lot of Dollar General cases. And in these commitments, there were like 16 commitments, one of which said the only store that can ever be here is Walgreens. But then the other commitments talked about other stores being there. It was very confusing, very, very confusing. And the courts got that case and said, yeah, Dollar General can go in there. And here's why. Because these terms of the commitments contradict one another, and commitments restrain the use of land, and that's against public policy. So we're always going to read these to allow people to use the land in a certain way. Now, that made everybody in this neighborhood mad, but that's really a good decision. So I always say when we are asking for commitments, it is really, really important that we get those right, and that we not only get those right for now, but we may be talking about it 25 or 30 years in the future. And so I like this case, and I hang on to this one in training because, boy, that's a hard lesson. The staff position was Walgreens only. The city of Indianapolis, Walgreens only, that's why we wrote that. And the court said, well, then why'd you write these other 15 things that make it sound like it would apply to something that wasn't a Walgreens?
So the key is the contradiction. You can't have that written contradiction, but you can have commitments that control the
Absolutely.
the use of the land.
Absolutely. It was the contradiction that got them in trouble.
Okay.
If they had just stopped with number 1, this is approved for a Walgreens only. If Walgreens ever goes out of business, that whoever wants to use that land has to come in and rezone it, that would have been fine. Good question. Okay, the Hemsel case. This is for your rural area, but the Hemsel case at the bottom of 35 is a right to farm case. This is out of Hendricks County. This is brother against brother, hog farm brother against former hog farm brother. And these are nice people. I know of them, but they had a little disagreement. And the Right to Farm Act says you can't sue a farmer for farming. Doesn't matter what the smell is, the dust is, or the noise is, they win. And so this brother who used to farm with his brother didn't farm with his brother anymore, and he challenged the Right to Farm Act, challenged the act itself on the basis of the Constitution, and the court said no. The legislature can give special protections for farmers. They do so that we have food. They can do that. And they can treat farmers different than every other citizen. So out in your rural area, not all my clients, I wouldn't even touch this, but I mean, this is an important case you may run into, and you hear references to it, but just know that the rationale behind the Right to Farm Act is food security. That's what it's about. Josh can tell you about it, but it's a real thing. Okay, if you'll go back to page 40. 40, one of my favorite cases to use in training is an unpublished case. And as Nikki and Nick could tell you, unpublished means that it has no legal precedent on any other case, but it can be used for purposes of instruction. And I think it's a good case used for instruction. This is a Brownsburg rezone case, and this is the case that said the court's going to look at everything. They're going to look at the conversation. They're going to look at the staff reports. They're going to look at what remonstrators said. And when they get there, if they can just say that it looks like the town council paid due regard to the 5 factors, and that the totality, even if it's 3-2, 3 factors in favor, 2 against, if we can just see that statements made by the town council members showed they had reasons, we're not going to question their reasons. And so like that's a really, really important case. In my opinion, it affirms 86 years of zoning law, but they just said it better than our courts have said it before. And this case was the one case where they talked a lot about all the information that is in a good staff report. And you guys have great staff reports. I know of some plan commissions that don't receive a staff report. Can you imagine? It's like, I mean, can you imagine how long their meetings take because they don't have staff reports? But so staff reports are good. So the Becerra case, the Brownsburg case, I like a lot. 15, the Maryville case I like because it stands for a proposition that comes up all the time, and that is people are going to stand right here and they're going to say, don't approve this rezone. We have enough chicken restaurants, or we have enough. In this case, it was storage, self-storage units, and we don't need it. And the courts say that is not our job as Plan Commission members in BZA. It's not our job to protect people from competition. In fact, since one of our 5 factors is the effect of, real estate and all, that one of the purposes of land use is to increase competition. It really is. So we had it all wrong. Depending on what part of the state you're in, I will tell you, this was in the north. It's different up there. That argument held weight up there for a long time. Protective economics, but it's not the law. So I always want to mention that one. If you go to page 41, Mammoth Solar, there's a case which really surprised me, but this case stands for the proposition that if your ordinance says that a petitioner has to bring 13 things and give it to Jose, and Jose gets 10 of them and he says, those other 3 don't matter, we can't do that. We can't do that, and not for the reason you think. Now, we planning attorneys always took the position that there's a case that said we can enforce our own ordinances or not. So I would have missed this one. But the reason the judges ruled in this manner, actually I agree with. They said, well, it's not for the reasons you would think, you planning lawyers who, you're right, you can follow your own ordinances, but here's the thing. We've got these 350 people who want to remonstrate against this solar farm, and if you don't require everything to be submitted that is required by your ordinance to be committed, otherwise, does Jose get to decide what gets submitted on a solar project? No, the town council gets to decide, right? You are robbing the remonstrators from the opportunity to prepare for their public hearing. And that was the basis of the decision. Now, I agree with that. It's just none of the planning attorneys that I know, and they're all good, thought about that. We would have all gotten this case wrong. So that's a big case. If you go to page 42, there is an Arlupa case there we talked about last year. I love this case because it has to do with football. And although Edgewood High School of the Sacred Heart in Milwaukee may have thought that football was the same as God, they lost this case about having Friday night football. They didn't have lights. The zoning ordinance wouldn't let them have lights. And so they had to play their football on Saturdays, which is actually very common on the East Coast. But they wanted to play Friday night like the public schools. And so they challenged the cities, but their school was an old Catholic school, which was surrounded by a neighborhood now. It wasn't out by itself. It was in a very densely populated area. So in the original rezone approval, 35 years before, they said, you can do all that, but no lights, no outdoor sports lights. And Friday night football is a big deal, right? We all know that. And so, ironically, the courts, so they filed suit under Arlupa. They said, you're treating us differently. Public schools get to have lights. We don't get to have lights. That's religious discrimination. And the court said, no, that's not religious discrimination because it has nothing to do with the furtherance. Football has nothing to do with your furtherance of your religious mission, which would be blasphemy in some Catholic schools, I'm sure, some that I can think of, and certainly Notre Dame. But that was what they said. They said, look, you're forgetting the last part of the test is, does it have to do with the furtherance of your religious mission? We don't think football has anything to do with the furtherance of your mission. So there's an Arlupa case for you. The Arlupa case I like is this case about a megachurch, and the county commissioners were the ones who had trouble. But in that case, it was a normal case. Nothing seemed to happen. It was denied. Of course, the church immediately appealed and started deposing all the county commission president's friends. Did he ever talk about the case? Oh, yeah. What did he say about it? Oh, he hates megachurches. His church has 35 people up in the mountains, and there's no way he's ever going to approve that mega. He told you that? Yeah. When did he tell you that? Oh, at coffee. One day, me and a couple of the guys meet for coffee every Wednesday. Really? What are their names? Now, Ploppers, no, he's going to depose those other guys too, right, Nick? We're going to depose them all? Yeah, every guy said, oh, yeah, he said long before that hearing he was never going to prove it. And guess what? They said, well, that is discrimination on the basis of religion. You can't do that. And we would never have known except you started talking about it at coffee every Wednesday morning with your 4 friends. So just remember that. If you go to page 44, I just say this for reasons I won't explain, but there was a case in 24 about whether or not we can enforce these obligations people have to build sidewalks. You hear a lot about these sidewalks, right? Yeah, the courts say absolutely. We can absolutely do that. So I know you've been dealing with that, but we can do that. And then on page 45, you'll see the chosen case again with some more detail. Now then, just for Mr. Plopper, on page 46, you will see some open door law cases, and I love reading them because they're fun. But I'm just going to talk about a couple of them, but please read them because they are entertaining. So the first one is Posey County BZA. I'm just going to talk about this. We had to do this last year. We had to have a executive session about litigation. And so you can do that. That's one of the reasons you can meet in executive session is discuss strategy with respect to litigation, which is either you want to initiate or has been threatened against you in writing. You can then talk about what do you want to do? How do you want to react to it? We can talk frankly then. It's one of the few things you can talk about in an executive session. So that's what happened. Down in Posey County, Southern Indiana, the BZA, they decided they wanted to appeal the decision of the trial court about one of their decisions. They had their executive session. Their lawyer marched out of that room and filed an appeal. Then when the appeal was filed, the other party said, I've been through the minutes of the BZA, and I don't see that the BZA ever authorized you to file the appeal. Now, this gets to be important because you have 30 days to file an appeal, a notice of appeal. If you miss that deadline, you can't appeal. So, of course, no one told the attorney for the BZA that he maybe didn't have authority until after 30 days expired. This is important. So Court said, yeah, you can't do that, because what you have to do is you have to come out in a public meeting then and vote. You can't vote in an executive session. You can't take any action at all in an executive session. So because you didn't come out into this room and vote on it, there was no action. So late last year, you all had to have a vote, and this is exactly why, because down in Posey County, I don't know how important the appeal was to them, but they didn't get that appeal because they didn't have any authority to, the lawyer had no authority to file it because there has to be a vote taken to do that. So that's important to remember. You will see under number 5, there's a Pittsburgh case about 3 members of a 5-member council talking about something and what that is. And then Montgomery County Board of Commissioners, or Monroe County Board of Commissioners, you'll see that your committees, typically speaking now, unless there's only one of you on a committee, you can have this, one of you and a bunch of other people, that committee can meet in private. The minute there's more than one of you on a committee, then that's a public meeting. And then the last one, the Marshall County, which is it's just a bunch of people on a planning commission, they had an executive session to discuss a personnel matter, as I recall. But then toward the end of that, they said, hey, this is great about Sylvia. Yeah, let's keep her. Let's not fire her. But hey, what are we going to do about these battery storage things? I mean, we really need to start talking about that. And they had a little discussion, and they told the staff they wanted them to bring an ordinance to them that said whatever. Well, they can't do that. Okay, that's not, you can't talk about that particular topic in an executive session. So, of course, they could talk about, and they provided notice saying we're going to talk about personnel issues. That's fine. But when you're in executive session, you can't let that leak into other areas. Now, you might ask yourself, I'll see who's paying attention, how did the public access counselor learn this happened? One of the planning commission called and ratted out his friends. Hey, I was just at a meeting where this happened. Is that a violation of the open door law? Yes, and thank you for calling. And so you don't really see that very often, but that's what happened in this case. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
What happens if it's, not everything's gonna fit in here? So we have enough people that they're out in the hallways. What do we do with that?
What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to set up an overflow, one of two things. Set up an overflow room that has a TV in it where they seeing the same thing that's going on in here, and then allow them, when their case is heard they want to speak on, they can come in and speak.
Okay.
I have one of those next week. Or move it to a different location, like a school auditorium, and I've been part of that before. That's when you know
ahead of
you're,
time, though.
I'm sorry?
But what if you don't know ahead of time?
Well, back there is a sign that says how many people can come in this room. So if you don't know it and it happens, you may have to cancel the meeting. Because they have a right to be in the room and hear what they have. That it's a statutory right. See, the public hearings, what we do is different. We're different than any other board except for the BZA, is that there's a statutory right of the public to remonstrate. So we have to give it to them.
Right, okay.
When you have a meeting at the high school auditorium, you know you're in trouble. I'll just tell you, having been to one. The largest one I've been to is 600 people. They all agreed on with the issue. They all agreed, but every one of them spoke. It took 3 meetings, 4 hours each to get through it. So that was fun. Good question. Thank you.
It's not a cancellation of the meeting, it's a postponement or a continuance of the meeting, or how do you actually phrase that?
You continue that case.
So if we had one case out of 10 one night, and we knew that that was going to flood the room, we could make an announcement that that item's going to be taken off the agenda and moved to a later date at a different location to accommodate.
Yeah, probably a special meeting,
Okay.
where that's the only thing you're going to talk about, if you have that many people, if you're smart.
Homeowners Association covenants, I agree we don't want to necessarily look at those, but I know of one case here in Zionsville where the covenants actually included the commitments of the developer. And in that covenant, it read that with 2/3 vote of the homeowners, they could remove anything or change anything in the covenants. Is it possible for us to look at those just to make sure mistakes like that haven't happened?
Oh, yeah, you can look at them. It's not that you can't look at them. We just don't enforce them. We don't enforce their covenants.
And we,
Now, if they have a commitment in there, then that is a commitment in the rezone ordinance, so we will enforce those.
so even if they voted it out, we theoretically, they can't legally remove it, even though that's the only,
That's true, and there are multiple restrictions on what HOAs can do and can't do, and more just got passed in this session. So they can't do half the things they think they can do. And I'm working on one of those right now. I'm the attorney for an HOA where I'm gonna be telling them whether they can do or not do what they want to do.
I know of at least one ordinance, zoning ordinance, that grants plan commissions, and they call it a waiver. But it more, or less, so some zoning ordinances I know have discretion built into them for staff to, and usually it's to grant a little bit of relief. It's, the staff can reduce the planting requirements by up to 10% for these causes. So it doesn't even have to go to a BZA where it always will get approved in all likelihood.
Right.
Another community has done the same thing, but given that discretion to the Plan Commission and called it a waiver of development standards, again, with a threshold of how much. Like, the Plan Commission can reduce this by 10%, same as what staff might have been given. Do you think that that's a legal?
I think that is fine, as
Okay.
long as the ordinance, what the cases have said is, you have the powers, you as a plan commission have the powers the ordinance gives you.
Okay.
So if
I
they
don't
say
want to
it, yeah.
usurp BZA by any means, but sometimes kind of a slam dunk item, and certainly within bumpers, within limits.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things like landscaping and lighting even, and signage. Sometimes they think that the discretion, because not everybody, there isn't just one right answer on landscaping and some of these things. And so it's not uncommon for them to say, okay, if we're going to be flexible with that, is the BZA really the right place for that? The law says, this isn't my opinion or anybody else, this is the Indiana law says the experts in planning and zoning, those are the plan commission members. No disrespect to the BZA. They just say, the people who are best suited to make those decisions is plan commission. I would say I agree with that.
I like the idea of only coming to, the developer only having to come to one meeting too.
I do too.
Instead of going to two.
Yeah.
And again, if it's a really benign type of a waiver, anything controversial, I think, goes BZA.
Yeah, if you have a new zoning ordinance proposed at some point in time, these issues get to be really important with communicating with the town council about, hey, who do we want to look at it? Why some might be better for the plan commission, some might be better for BZA. And I went through this process recently where we had a lot of conversation about that. And, but yeah, as long as the zoning ordinance says that you may grant relief from or a waiver of something in the zoning ordinance, that's absolutely fine. But if it doesn't say that, you have no power to do that.
I don't think we have anything in there today, and I'm not proposing anything. It's just a curiosity if that's a possibility or not. Does anyone else
Okay,
have
thank you. I'll
questions?
stick around if you have any other questions. I appreciate your attention this morning.
Thank you very much.
Is there a motion to close? So moved.
Second.
Third. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right.
I almost said, I have 15 more questions, 6 parts each.